Chapter 2753, Godslayer's Treasure. Chapter 2753, Godslayer's Treasure. The ruined mountain range? Illusory words and unyielding heart were stunned by Shifeng's answer, their complexions turning indescribably grim. The two of them were not unfamiliar with the name Ruined Mountain Range. On the contrary, this was a name that resounded among the various superpowers. The superpowers usually sent scouts to check out level 100+ neutral maps, which had many danger zones. Some superpowers would even investigate level 130 to level 150 neutral maps. Of the explorations conducted by the superpowers, none of the exploration teams they sent into the ruined mountain range had returned alive. Yes. Despite the ruined mountain range being only a level 120+ neutral map, none of the expert players that entered it had returned alive. In fact, they didn't even know how they died. After suffering such bizarre losses, the superpowers stopped attempting to explore the ruined mountain range. After all, the players capable of entering level 120+ neutral maps were incredibly strong experts, with even the weakest among them being at the flowing water realm. Even the superpowers couldn't afford to have too many of such experts dying. Due to this reason, the ruined mountain range had become a forbidden land for the various superpowers. Even though the superpowers already had level 118+ expert players under their command now, none of them dared make another attempt. After a while, Unyielding Heart asked nervously, "Must we go in there?" Peak experts were the main pillars supporting their guilds. Even the death of one of these experts would distress them. It would be an absolute nightmare if several dozen of them died. We must. Entering the ruined mountain range is the prerequisite for our success, Shifeng said, nodding. If possible, he wouldn't want to enter the ruined mountain range at this time, either. However, the ruined mountain range was his only option to secure a large amount of resources quickly. This was because the ruined mountain range was a true forbidden land with the lowest level requirement. Players had a chance of surviving in the neutral map so long as they reached level 120. Moreover, the ruined mountain range was also one of the most highly contested forbidden lands in his previous life. Although the ruined mountain range was labeled a forbidden land, it wasn't a forbidden land for all life. Instead, it was only a forbidden land for humans. Humans would face great danger when entering the ruined mountain range, however, non-humans wouldn't. Most importantly, the clue he had to the Godslayer led him to the ruined mountain range. After analyzing the map clue and with his understanding of the ruined mountain range, he felt it was highly likely that one of the Godslayer's treasures was hidden inside the Forbidden Land. The Earthfall Secret Land. This was something he had only heard of during his previous life. Although he didn't know who activated the Earthfall Secret Land, what he did know was that the 5 great superguilds had dispatched over 40 Tier 5 experts to contest for it. The struggle between these experts had very nearly flattened the ruined mountain range's outer area. As to what the Earthfall Secret Land contained, there had been all sorts of rumors about it in the outside world. However, nobody actually had a concrete answer. This was because shortly after the Earthfall Secret Land appeared, 3 of the 5 great superguilds had joined forces to monopolize that place. The 3 guilds had prohibited not only outsiders from entering but even their own internal members. The minimum condition to enter the Earthfall Secret Land had been being a Tier 4 core member. Nevertheless, one thing was certain, the Landfall Secret Land was a different dimension the Godslayer had created. The Secret Land had boasted an abundance of riches and ore veins. Magic crystals could also be found all around. It wasn't a place the outside world could compare to. Hence, Shifeng intended to take a look at the Earthfall Secret Land. However, the road leading to the Earthfall Secret Land was a treacherous one. After all, countless Tier 4 players had died in the ruined mountain range in his previous life. Even Tier 5 players had fallen in the map. It wasn't a place that lone individuals could easily traverse. Therefore, Shifeng planned to tap the power of Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul for this endeavor. The ruined mountain range is extraordinary. Not to mention, the 2 of our guilds don't even have enough people to form a 100-man team of peak experts. I'm afraid it's going to be difficult to survive there, Illusory Words stated. How about we include some additional Tier 3 experts? That will increase our chances. Compared to Tier 3 peak experts, ordinary Tier 3 experts were far less prized. If they came across dangerous situations, they could have the ordinary experts scout ahead instead of putting the peak experts at risk. This method was frequently employed by superpowers when exploring forbidden lands. No. Shaking his head, Shifeng smiled and said, "The ones participating in this expedition aren't just experts from your 2 guilds. Other experts will come with us, as well." Other experts? Are they safe? Illusory words and unyielding heart were confused by Shifeng's words. The operation this time was evidently a top secret. They couldn't afford to invite outsiders at all. Moreover, the operation had high requirements for players. They found it hard to believe that Zero Wing actually had other allies that could be trusted for this operation. They're safe. Their strength is also more than enough to participate in this operation, Shifeng said, chuckling. The Earthfall secret land was a place that the 5 great super guilds had considered a strategic resource. Once there, he naturally couldn't explore it together with Crimson Emperors and Unyielding Souls members. However, exploring the secret land by himself was also impossible. Hence, he needed to bring some other people with him. Only, outsiders did not know that these people were actually part of Zero Wing. Afterward, Shifeng had Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart gather their guild's peak experts while he contacted the Azura Adventurer team. As for the secret Covenant Tower, he tasked Fire Dance and the rest of Zero Wing's main force to handle it. After all, the expedition to the ruined mountain range would take a lot of time. Since Fire Dance and the others could already challenge their Tier 4 promotion quests, it would be a loss for them to accompany him. Black Dragon Empire, Thousand Rock Town. Several dozen flashes appeared on the town's teleportation array as Unyielding Souls and Crimson Emperor's peak experts arrived in this desolate border town. Although Thousand Rock Town was known as a town, there were hardly any NPCs there, let alone players, because of the town's proximity to the ruined mountain range. The neutral map was so dangerous that even NPCs wished to avoid it. After glancing at the desolate street, Blue Gown eyed Shifeng, who stood nearby. She then asked Illusory Words curiously through a private conversation, "Big Sis Illusory, who do you think guild leader Black Flame invited?" In her opinion, their team, which consisted entirely of peak experts or better, was incredibly rare even in the entire God's domain. She found it inconceivable that Zero Wing could invite another team capable of rivaling theirs. Aside from the many peak experts, their team had Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart. The former was a cleric who stood at the pinnacle of God's domain, while the latter was a berserker with defense rivaling MT classes. There was also Blue Gown herself, who was the 3rd-ranked Guardian Knight in Crimson Emperor's main force. At this stage of the game, only the 5 great super guilds would be capable of fielding such a team. I don't know. According to the information we gathered, only the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's Phoenix Rain might be of help. However, Phoenix Rain disappeared, so Zero Wing shouldn't have any other capable allies, Illusory Words replied, shaking her head. She, too, was curious about the allies Shifeng mentioned. Shortly after Illusory Words and Blue Gown spoke with each other, a dozen or so flashes appeared on the teleportation array once more. When these new arrivals walked out of the teleportation array, both Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart were shocked. Every one of these new arrivals radiated an astonishingly powerful aura. By the looks of it, not only had they unlocked their mana bodies, but their progress should have reached 100% as well. The callous man walking at the head of the group was someone even Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart had to be wary of. Lightning Demon Lifeless Thorn. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Lifeless Thorn was a ruthless person who persisted in challenging the various experts of God's domain. Some time ago, he had even fought Stalwart Sky, one of the Battle Wolves' Wolf Kings, to a draw and was labeled by the Secret Pavilion as one of the Eastern Continent's top 10 rookies. At this time, Lifeless Thorn boasted not only a high level of 122 but also 7 pieces of epic equipment. And although he had hidden the glow effect of the spear he carried on his back, the archaic magic patterns engraved on it betrayed the spear's superiority to ordinary epic weapons. The Azura Adventurer team. Why are they here? Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart were dying of curiosity at the sight of Lifeless Thorn's group. After all, The Azura Adventurer Team was currently a top adventurer team in God's domain. Moreover, it possessed an incredibly mysterious background. Not only did the Adventurer Team conquer many high-difficulty, large-scale team dungeons, but the Adventurer Team's members also possessed unfathomable strength. Many of the Adventurer Team's members had even reached the Spiritualization Realm 1, which allowed them to exhibit extraordinary combat power. Various superpowers had frantically tried to recruit the Adventurer Team. However, the Azura Adventurer Team had rejected all the offers. Although many superpowers had sent teams led by peak experts in retaliation, none of these teams succeeded. Moreover, these teams usually returned with heavy losses. Everyone's here. Let's go. Chapter 2754, Forbidden Land for Humans. Chapter 2754, Forbidden Land for Humans. Everyone's here? Illusory words and unyielding heart turned to Shifeng in astonishment. Could it be them? Not only did the Azura Adventurer Team possess a reputation on the eastern continent of God's domain, but according to rumor, the Adventurer Team also controlled more than half of the Ice Crystal world. All of the Adventurer Team's core members were incredibly mysterious. From time to time, unheard-of powerful geniuses would also appear in the Adventurer Team. It was also bruited about that the Azura Adventurer Team had an incredibly powerful commander. This commander was elusive and mysterious. Rumor had it that even Lifeless Thorn couldn't survive one hit from this commander, and that Lifeless Thorn was challenging the various superpowers experts so crazily because he wanted to challenge Azura's commander once more. This situation instilled fear in the various superpowers. For this reason, God's domain superpowers suspected that the Azura Adventurer Team had the backing of a mysterious and powerful force. In fact, they even suspected that this mysterious backer was someone from the upper zone's top layer. The Azura Adventurer Team had arrogantly rejected many of the powers that wished to recruit it. This, in turn, resulted in many clashes between Azura and the various powers. And the more Azura fought, the more famous it became. Now, however, it was actually revealed that Azura had a good relationship with Zero Wing. They'll be moving with us later on, Shifeng said. He then nodded at Lifeless Thorn and the others in greeting. Actually, even Shifeng was somewhat surprised when he saw Lifeless Thorn and the others. He never thought that they would improve so much in the time he hadn't seen them. Now, Lifeless Thorn and the others surpassed Fire Dance and Zero Wing's other main force members in levels. Moreover, Lifeless Thorn's aura suggested that he was half a step into the domain realm already. Shifeng had to admit that the man was truly a battle maniac. Although his frenziedly challenging God's domain's various experts had earned him a lot of enemies, the experience he racked up allowed him to improve rapidly. As for Solitary 9, Yang Ya, Cleansing Whistle, and the others standing beside Lifeless Thorn, they, too, had made significant improvement. It was evident they were at the Flowing Water Realm already. Moreover, they weren't all that far from reaching the Void Realm, either. If they received enlightenment now, they might very well break through to the next level immediately. Meanwhile, Shifeng's introduction of them rendered Lifeless Thorn and the others momentarily speechless. They nodded at illusory words and unyielding heart in acknowledgement, none of them showing any intention of speaking to the two strangers. At this time, Solitary 9 spoke to Shifeng excitedly through a private conversation, asking, "Commander, what do you think of the people we brought this time? Everyone's combat power is on par with peak experts. We didn't shame you, right?" "Indeed. I never thought you would manage to recruit so many talents," Shifeng said in astonishment as he studied Azura's team members. Quite a few of the Azura members present were people he was unacquainted with personally. However, he had heard of a few of these people in his previous life. All of them had been well-known solo experts in the game. Two of them had even reached Tier 5, only slightly inferior to Lifeless Thorn, who had reached the demigod standard. Shifeng truly had not imagined that Lifeless Thorn and the others would be able to recruit all these people into the Azura Adventurer Team. Following this, Solitary 9 told Shifeng about recent events, mentioning that they had accidentally strayed into a magical place where time flowed at a completely different rate, and the players residing there were incredibly strong. In that magical place, Refinement Realm experts were considered third-rate. They were no big deal whatsoever. The players there were also very high-leveled, with some having even reached level 130 already. When Solitary 9 and the others visited that place, they had been utterly dumbfounded. During their stay in that magical place, they had frequently fought with the experts there. This allowed them to gain a lot of inspiration and improvement. Unfortunately, the system abruptly brought them back to the main continent for some reason. When they returned, their levels surpassed that of the Superpow's peak experts by a large margin. Solitary 9's tale surprised Shifeng. He never thought that God's domain would actually have such a magical area. However, when he remembered that Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had fought in a different world for 80 years, he concluded that the situation Lifeless Thorn and the others had found themselves in was nothing to fuss about. Meanwhile, Crimson Emperor's and Unyielding Soul's members also finished their preparations to set off. Following which, everyone got on their flying mounts and flew toward the ruined mountain range. The ruined mountain range occupied a huge area on the continent of God's domain. According to players' estimates, the entire ruined mountain range could rival the combined area of 5 or 6 empires and connected many places. The neutral map's level 120 region was only the periphery. If players wished to survive in the map's inner region, they would have to reach level 150 at the very least. As for the ruined mountain range's core area, only level 180 plus, Tier 5 experts could enter there. Even level 200, Tier 4 experts wouldn't survive. After flying for 7 hours straight, Shifeng and the others finally saw a stretch of majestic mountains on the horizon. Just the mountains in the ruined mountain range's periphery already reached heights of more than 30,000 meters. The sky of the mountain range was also shrouded in thunderclouds, and purple lighting arcs frequently appeared, bombarding the mountain range. Those seeing the ruined mountain range for the first time were inevitably stunned by the magnificent and destructive scene before them. "We're descending," Shifeng instructed everyone after taking a look at the mountain range ahead. Flying mounts couldn't fly into the ruined mountain range. If players wished to enter the neutral map, they had to rely on their own 2 feet. This was because even Tier 5 experts couldn't withstand the purple lightning. Even a level 200, Tier 5 Guardian Knight would fall after suffering 3 to 5 lightning strikes. Anyone who wished to fly inside the ruined mountain range would have to reach Tier 6 first. Only then could they endure the purple lightning. Shortly afterward, Shifeng and the others arrived in a forest near the ruined mountain range. They then stored their flying mounts one after another. "Once we enter the ruined mountain range, everyone must stick to the team as closely as possible. You must not split off from the team under any circumstances. Otherwise, you'll be responsible for the consequences," Shifeng said after everyone had finished organizing themselves. "Remember, even if someone beside you is asking for help, or I tell you to run for your lives, ignore everything. You must continue sticking to the team and advance. We also need to move as fast as possible." Upon hearing Shifeng's command, everyone present was surprised and puzzled. "Guild leader Black Flame, are we supposed to ignore even your commands after we enter the map?" Blue Gown asked, her eyes filled with questions as she looked at Shifeng. Shifeng had clearly stated before that they needed to listen to his every command. Yet, now, he was telling them to ignore his commands once they entered the ruined mountain range. His instructions were simply incomprehensible. "Yes. Once you enter, you can ignore any of my commands temporarily. You can also ignore everyone around you until the team comes to a halt," Shifeng said, nodding. "Why?" Illusory Words was also slightly confused by this situation. "Is there an illusion inside?" "I'm not sure, either. In any case, the environment inside is very special. You will suffer from hallucinations once you enter. However, despite being hallucinations, everything you see isn't an illusion, but real instead. Nobody can tell what is real or fake once inside. You can treat everything as real, and you can also treat everything as fake," Shifeng said calmly. "The only thing I am certain of is that stopping inside means death." This was also why he had Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul dispatch only peak experts for this expedition. Anyone capable of becoming a peak expert would possess a firm mindset. Meanwhile, only with a firm mindset could one pass through the ruined mountain range's periphery. "How can there be such an environment?" Blue Gown was shocked at Shifeng's explanation. As far as she knew, forbidden lands were merely places with harsh environments and strong monsters. Yet, the ruined mountain range was actually a place that subjected players to hallucinations. At this moment, let alone Blue Gown, even illusory words and unyielding heart had grim expressions on their faces. Suddenly, they understood why the various superpowers experts had died unawares after entering the ruined mountain range. In fact, it would be strange if they knew how they died. In this world, the scariest thing was the unknown. Meanwhile, the ruined mountain range undoubtedly fulfilled this condition. Although they didn't know whether there were any monsters in the ruined mountain range's periphery, just the unique environment alone made it a scary place. In fact, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it the scariest place they had visited since entering God's domain. The ruined mountain range truly deserved its reputation as a forbidden land for humans. "Alright, let's head inside," Shifeng said after seeing that everyone had digested his words. "Remember, stick to the team." Afterward, Shifeng led the team to a mountain path that led into the ruined mountain range. The mountain path was relatively close by. Tier 3 players would take only a few minutes to cross the distance on foot. Less than 10 minutes later, the team of 100+ players entered the ruined mountain range's perimeter. The moment everyone set foot into the neutral map, their mood grew solemn. They also followed Shifeng's command and stuck close to each other. The team advanced at a slow pace. Even the Tier 3 magical class players of the team managed to keep up easily. The ruined mountain range's environment was surprisingly better than everyone imagined. The map did not constantly sap their stamina or concentration. In fact, very little foreign energy invaded their bodies here. Around half an hour later, the team still had not come across a single monster. The whole mountain range was surprisingly safe and peaceful. Unlike what they imagined, the map wasn't infested with monsters that could easily trample over Tier 3 players. "It seems the ruined mountain range isn't a big deal, after all," Blue Gown said as she observed her surroundings. Under the circumstances, her initial expectation had disappeared completely. At Blue Gown's words, everyone in the team also started to feel that Shifeng had blown things out of proportion. He had only made them needlessly anxious. "Blue, I'll have to rely on you once monsters start appearing later on," a level 119 female summoner said to Blue Gown. "Sure, no problem. I'll make sure no monster gets near you," Blue Gown said confidently. The female summoner felt relieved at Blue Gown's assurance. "See. The next moment, the sound of something splashing suddenly entered everyone's ears. The smell of blood also quickly spread into the surroundings. Meanwhile, everyone in the team stared at the female summoner and Blue Gown in shock. "You. Why?" The female summoner stared at Blue Gown in consternation. Before anyone realized it, Blue Gown had stabbed the female summoner with her long sword, causing the latter to lose HP continuously. Blue Gown stared at the female summoner in confusion. A bright smile appearing on her face, she asked in a dissatisfied tone, "Why?" After saying so, Blue Gown slashed the female summoner's throat, killing her. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. What's going on? Immediately, the people standing behind Blue Gown stared at her in shock and confusion. They couldn't understand why Blue Gown would suddenly attack a fellow teammate. Moreover, the smile on her face was unspeakably strange. The gaze she used to look at them also seemed as if she wasn't looking at humans. "What's the matter with you guys?" Blue Gown asked in confusion when she saw everyone looking at her warily. "Why are you looking at me like that?" However, despite her words, Blue Gown had an indescribably calm expression on her face. As if she had just stepped on an ant by the roadside, she was completely oblivious to the fact that she had just killed one of her teammates. Chapter 2755, Monster. Chapter 2755, Monster. Did Blue get possessed by a monster? What should we do now? Anyway, let's step back and keep our distance. Everyone slowly backed away from Blue Gown while staring at her in confusion. After all, Blue Gown possessed extraordinary strength as well as a hidden class for Guardian Knights. If they allowed her to get close to them, they would meet a similar fate to that female summoner. Meanwhile, upon noticing the players behind her stepping away, Blue Gown slowed her pace and looked at her teammates in confusion. What's the matter with you guys? While Blue Gown asked this question, the long sword in her hand bloomed with a dazzling light. The surrounding space even began to twist from the weapon's power. Not good. Be careful. She's using a Tier 3 legacy skill. We'll definitely die if we get hit, a Tier 3 expert familiar with Blue Gown warned Unyielding Souls experts. Afterward, this person dashed straight into the nearby forest. The next moment, several other peak experts from Crimson Emperor also hid in the nearby forest one after another. Upon seeing this, Unyielding Souls experts couldn't help hesitating over whether to fight or hide. On the other hand, Blue Gown was confused when she saw Crimson Emperor's members fleeing, turning toward the female summoner who should have long since been dead. Blue Gown asked, what do you think is wrong with them? Why did they look at me like that just now? I don't know, either, the female summoner named Clear T answered, shaking her head. With a confused expression on her face, she said, why don't we follow them and take a look? It'll be bad if they move too far away from the team. I guess you're right. Blue Gown nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, when Illusory Words, who stood some distance ahead of Blue Gown, noticed Blue Gown splitting away from the team, she promptly slowed her pace. Blue, what are you doing? Illusory Words shouted at Blue Gown in dissatisfaction. Also, who have you been talking to all this time? Me. Turning toward Illusory Words, Blue Gown answered, haven't I been talking to Clear T all this time? Clear T? Looking at Blue Gown strangely, Illusory Words said, isn't T at the front of the team? The front? Blue Gown immediately turned to look at Clear T. However, before she realized it, the female summoner whom she had been chatting with merrily just a moment ago was nowhere to be seen. Where did she go? Wait, why have so many of our members gone missing? Illusory Words asked in confusion. I don't know what got into them, but they suddenly retreated into the forest over there, Blue Gown said, shaking her head. She, too, was confused at this situation. No. We were fooled. Illusory Words' complexion darkened when she saw that the entire rear section of the team had disappeared. Black Flame never planned to bring us into the ruined mountain range. He must have been planning to use the ruined mountain range's power to annihilate our peak expert. This, Blue Gown was momentarily stunned. Now that we've suffered such severe losses already, if we continue following him, he'll definitely lead us to our death. Our only choice is to kill him now. Illusory Words said in a whisper to Blue Gown while looking at the front at Shafong, who was leading the team. I'll assist you. With your strength, even if you can't kill him in one hit, you should still be able to injure him heavily. At that time, I'll land the finishing blow on him. This despicable Black Flame. I knew he wasn't anything good. Blue Gown nodded in agreement to Illusory Words' plan. Blue Gown made her way toward Shafong at a quick pace. When less than 100 yards separated them, Blue Gown suddenly disappeared, then reappeared behind Shafong, a dazzling brilliance bursting out from the longsword she wielded. She swung her sword at the defenseless Shafong. The next moment, countless spatial cracks appeared before Blue Gown and extended up to 100 yards away. Blue Gown, what are you doing? Unyielding Heart was startled when he saw Blue Gown suddenly attacking Shafong. However, Blue Gown paid no attention to Unyielding Heart at all, launching another ruthless attack immediately after her first one. However, after executing her second attack, Blue Gown was dumbfounded. Where did he go? Looking ahead, Blue Gown failed to see anyone standing on the road before her, and she froze in stupefaction. By the time Blue Gown reacted to the situation, Shafong was already standing beside her and looking at her quietly. At this time, Unyielding Heart also took action, grabbing Blue Gown's wrist, preventing her from attacking again. Blue Gown, what are you doing? Why are you attacking guild leader Black Flame? Have you lost your mind? Unyielding Heart questioned. Don't stop me, he's trying to kill us, Blue Gown said as she glared at Shafong. He's trying to annihilate our peak experts using the ruined mountain range. If you don't believe me, look behind. Everyone at the back has disappeared already. Disappeared? Startled by Blue Gown's words, Unyielding Heart automatically turned to look to the team's rear. Upon seeing that fewer than 20 people remained in the team, Unyielding Heart paled. Guild leader Black Flame, are you really? In this situation, Even unyielding heart couldn't help doubting Shifeng's motives. Are you really trying to annihilate us? Before unyielding heart finished speaking, Shifeng had already unsheathed the abyssal blade. Slash. Before Blue Gown could react, Shifeng had cleaved unyielding heart in half, killing the latter instantly. You. Blue Gown was momentarily stunned when she saw unyielding heart getting killed. She then bellowed at Shifeng, "You really are trying to annihilate the peak experts of our two guild. I'll fight you to death." After Blue Gown said so, the intensity of her aura skyrocketed until it rivaled that of level 120 mythic monsters. However, before she could take action, Shifeng used Darkness Bind. Several dozen chains promptly appeared and restricted Blue Gown's movements. Despite her strength rivaling Tier 4 mythic monsters, all she could do was glare at Shifeng. She couldn't move her body in the slightest. Looking at Blue Gown, Shifeng said evenly, "You need to calm down." "Calm down? You want me to calm down?" Blue Gown's eyes burned with a fiery rage. "You killed Vice Guild Leader Heart, yet you want me to calm down? Take a clear look at the situation," Shifeng shouted while releasing his killing intent and directing it at Blue Gown. The intense killing intent instantly shocked Blue Gown out of her anger. And as if having realized something, she then gawked at her surroundings. "What the hell is going on with me?" Before Blue Gown realized it, more people had appeared around her. Unyielding Heart stood among these new additions and was currently staring at her with a confused look on his face. "Blue, what's gotten into you? Why are you trying to kill guild leader Black Flame so desperately?" Illusory Words asked, similarly surprised by Blue Gown's actions. Everyone had been advancing carefully before. Yet, for some reason, Blue Gown had suddenly charged up to Shifeng and attacked him. Fortunately, Shifeng had reacted quickly and dodged her attack in time. An illusion? I got caught in an illusion? Blue Gown was stunned by this situation. Everything she experienced before felt too real, so real that she didn't even notice that something was amiss. "What's going on here?" Unyielding Heart asked in surprise. "Does this mean you'll get trapped in an illusion even if you're just walking?" However, before Unyielding Heart and the others could figure out what was going on, Shifeng suddenly stabbed the abyssal blade into Blue Gown. "What are you doing, Guild Leader Black Flame?" Illusory Words asked, startled. Shifeng was a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Any random attack of his could reap millions of HP from mythic monsters. Killing Blue Gown, who had less than 3 million HP, would take no more than a hit. However, what occurred next made everyone's jaws drop. This was because Shifeng's attack failed to kill Blue Gown. A damage value exceeding 4 million had appeared above Blue Gown's head, yet the Guardian Knight's HP bar had fallen by only a small chunk, losing barely 3% of her HP. How is this possible? Unyielding Heart couldn't help doubting his eyes. For Blue Gown to lose only around 3% of her HP despite suffering over 4 million damage, her maximum HP had to exceed 200 million. A player having 200 million HP? Did a monster replace Blue? Illusory Words was also stunned by this situation. This was Illusory Words' first time seeing a monster transforming into a player. Moreover, the Blue Gown before her looked identical to the real one. However, before anyone could snap out of their surprise, Shifeng suddenly appeared beside Illusory Words and slashed at her with the abyssal blade. -6,434,654. Damage exceeding 6 million appeared above Illusory Words' head. However, similar to Blue Gown, Illusory Words lost less than 3% of her HP from the attack. Illusory Words looked at Shifeng strangely, failing to understand why Shifeng had attacked her all of a sudden. Meanwhile, Unyielding Heart, who saw all of this, was at a loss. He simply couldn't figure out what was happening right now. "Guild Leader Black Flame, what exactly are you doing?" After suffering an attack, Illusory Words hurriedly stepped back and used a healing spell on herself, instantly replenishing her HP back to full. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What am I doing? Chuckling, Shifeng said, "Of course, I'm getting rid of you monsters." "Monsters? What kind of joke are you making? How am I a monster? I'm a bona fide player," Illusory Words protested, her eyes wide with confusion as she looked at Shifeng. She then explained hurriedly, There must be a problem here. When everyone on the team saw that illusory words did not retaliate, combined with the sincerity in her voice, they had to nod their heads in agreement, feeling that there was definitely a problem here. If illusory words really were a monster, she should have retaliated after Shifeng attacked her. She wouldn't be trying to explain herself. In the meantime, Blue Gown looked at herself in shock. She couldn't believe that she had transformed into a monster. Am I actually the transformation of a monster? Chapter 2756, True Forbidden Land. Chapter 2756, True Forbidden Land. Blue Gown and Illusory Words' bizarre performance and words stunned everyone. Were Blue Gown and Illusory Words monsters or not? Previously, when they came across monsters, all they needed to do was attack the said monsters. If they couldn't defeat the monsters, they could just run. Now, however, they couldn't even tell whether the monsters they faced were actual monsters. What were they supposed to do in this situation? Immediately, a deathly silence fell over the entire team as everyone turned to look at their teammates, afraid that the one standing beside them was actually a monster in disguise. Illusory Words and Blue Gown also warily eyed each other. This weird scene was definitely a first for everyone. However, after this strange atmosphere lasted for several seconds, the sunny sky suddenly darkened. Lightning and thunder filled the surroundings. Before Blue Gown realized it, the people around her had disappeared. Simultaneously, a 6-meter-tall monster with a huge mouth and ethereal body had appeared beside her, and it had devoured half of her soul already. Despite having noticed this monster, she could only stare at it quietly like an immobile puppet. She couldn't move her body even if she wanted to. However, the next moment, a magic blade pierced the heart of this monster. The monster let loose an ear-piercing scream that made Blue Gown feel as if her head would burst. What's going on? Blue Gown, whose body currently resembled an ethereal soul, was all at sea. Right now, she truly could not distinguish what was real from what was fake. It was as if she had woken up from a dream, only to end up in another dream. Before she could react to the situation, the injured monster pounced on her once more, intending to devour the delicacy before it. Meanwhile, Blue Gown, who had returned to her physical body, was utterly powerless against the monster. Just being close to it petrified her and gave her a pounding headache. She couldn't put up any resistance whatsoever. Soul Devourer, Soul Monster, Great Lord, level 124 HP 440 million. However, before the Soul Devourer could reach Blue Gown, several magic swords shot through it in rapid succession. -71,514,654. -35,164,412. Several dozen terrifying damage values flashed above the Soul Devourer one after another, the Great Lord's HP zeroing out straight away. The monster then dispersed into particles of light, leaving behind a dozen or so crystal fragments in its place. Black Flame. Blue Gown looked at Shifeng in confusion, having fallen into a mentally weakened state, her voice tremulous with uncertainty. You sustained some mental attacks. Nearly half of your concentration was consumed, as well. It's best if you don't move around recklessly, Shifeng said as he looked at Blue Gown. Fortunately, you managed to walk out of that area. I wouldn't have been able to save you otherwise. Mental attacks. Blue Gown was taken aback. How is this possible? This was her first time hearing this term. Moreover, everything she had experienced before felt real. Such a situation was simply unheard of. She had experienced earth-shattering battles in God's domain before, but never such a terrifying illusion. She found it hard to imagine that a monster was actually capable of executing such an attack. Nothing is impossible in God's domain, especially in this forbidden land for humans, Shifeng said as he met Blue Gown's incredulous gaze. Shaking his head, he said, monsters in God's domain aren't limited to physical and magical attacks. They have many unknown ways to attack and lay traps. Even if a player possesses combat power far surpassing a monster's, the player will still get killed if they aren't careful. Take these monsters that are capable of employing mental attacks, for example. Even if you have superior basic attributes, so long as you get caught in their mental attack, if you don't have incredibly strong willpower and the concentration to break through their mental bindings, you will still get killed. This was also why it was important for players to improve not only their basic attributes but also their concentration. During the early stages of God's domain, players would rarely encounter mental attacks. Those that did wouldn't notice it due to their ignorance of mental attacks. However, past level 120 and after the first major update took place, mental attacks would appear much more frequently. Meanwhile, if players did not possess sufficiently strong willpower, they would still be helpless against mental attacks even if they had incredibly powerful basic attributes. Take Blue Gown, for example. She had been trapped inside the Soul Devourer's mental space and couldn't escape at all. Fortunately, she did not die inside the mental space. Otherwise, even if he managed to save her from the Soul Devourer, all he would have saved would be an empty husk. In God's domain, dying inside a mental space was no different from dying in the outside world. To put it simply, one would suffer a soul death. This was also why most players in his previous life dared not offend Tier 5 NPCs, as some of them wielded mental attacks. Meanwhile, suffering a soul death was much worse than a physical death. Worst case scenario, one would lose one's account and have to start all over again. After Shifeng finished speaking, he resumed controlling his magic swords to rescue the others. This is a true forbidden land. As Blue Gown looked at the death and destruction in her surroundings, she finally realized that the ruined mountain range was much scarier than she thought. Compared to the battles she had experienced before, the one just now was on an entirely different level. Moreover, she had never thought that there would be such forms of combat in a virtual reality game. Despite the Soul Devourer's basic attributes being inferior to hers, she had been utterly helpless against it. When that Soul Devourer approached her earlier, she had suffered an intense headache. Her head had hurt so much that she couldn't control her body, let alone fight. Blue Gown wasn't the only victim of a Soul Devourer's attack. Several dozen other people had been caught as well. Of those present, only 19 people managed to avoid the Soul Devourer's attacks. Of the 19 people, the Azura Adventurer team had an overwhelming advantage in numbers. 8 of the Adventurer team's members were unscathed, compared to the 5 members each of Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul. At this time, everyone was desperately trying to save those who had been caught. However, some of the victims were beyond rescue already. The devouring speed of the Soul Devourers varied. Some were slow to finish their prey, while others were quick. Evidently, some players had stronger resistance to mental attacks, while other players had weaker resistance. Those with weak resistance didn't have much of their souls left at this point. When Blue Gown noticed Azura's cleansing whistle, who was roughly the same age as herself, fighting a Soul Devourer, she was stunned. Am I that much weaker than her? Blue Gown couldn't help her surprise and confusion as she watched Cleansing Whistle. She considered herself one of the best among her peers. Her guild even recognized her as one of the top 3 talents of the younger generation. Yet, she was actually inferior to Cleansing Whistle, someone whose combat standard hadn't even reached the Void Realm yet. However, before Blue Gown could recover from her shock, she felt a chill envelop her body as if something was staring directly at her soul. What? This is a lie, right? How can we fight such a thing? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Blue Gown wasn't the only person who felt this sensation, everyone experienced it. When Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart looked in the direction of this feeling's source, they trembled in fear. A 30-meter tall, 3-headed monster loomed over the team, and every step it took made everyone's soul shudder in fear. Tedelia the Soul Singer, Realm Lord, Superior Mythic, Level 128 HP 20,500,000,000. Chapter 2757, 15 second. Chapter 2757, 15 second. Everyone gasped at Tedelia's appearance. A Realm Lord was an existence close to rivaling world bosses. Not to mention, Tedelia was a Realm Lord of the ruined mountain range. Its strength was most likely on par with that of world bosses in the outside world. This is the terror of a forbidden land for humans. Mu Lingshaw smiled wryly at the sight of the Soul Singer. She finally understood why none of the various superpowers expert teams managed to make it out of the ruined mountain range alive. It would be strange if they did. At this time, not only was half of their team dead, but they also had to fight a large number of soul devourers. Although the soul devourers weren't particularly strong, most of the surviving members of their team couldn't fully exhibit their combat power, either. The soul devourers dealt astonishingly powerful mental damage. Even after players broke free from the soul devourers' mental shackles, the mental damage still existed, affecting their brains. The consequent headaches prevented the players from executing delicate actions, which, in turn, lowered their combat standards by 2 ranks on average. Now, Void Realm experts could exhibit combat standards only at the Refinement Realm, while Domain Realm experts' combat standards were at the Void Realm. On the other hand, the Soul Devourers all had combat standards at the Trial Tower's 6th floor. They could undoubtedly be considered first-rate experts, not much inferior to ordinary Tier 3 experts in combat standards. With the addition of a Realm Lord, there was no way their team could get out of this situation alive. Among those still standing, only Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yang Ya, and Cleansing Whistle remained relatively calm, continuing to systematically slay the Soul Devourers troubling the players around them. 9, Thorn, and Yang Ya, help me hold the boss for 15 seconds. Shifeng said after saving another person from the Soul Devourers. Upon hearing Shifeng's command, Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart couldn't help doubting their ears. They're still going to fight in this situation. Their opponents consisted of several hundred Soul Devourers and 1 Realm Lord. The only thing they could and should do now was run away. The battle recovery of a monster of Tedelia's rank allowed it to regenerate 2% of its HP every 5 seconds. In other words, the Realm Lord could recover 410 million HP per 5 seconds. That was basically killing a Great Lord of the same level every 5 seconds. If they couldn't accomplish that, they wouldn't even be able to get Tedelia's HP below 98%. Meanwhile, their team currently had fewer than 30 people alive, nearly half of them in a mentally weakened state and incapable of combat. With Tedelia's defense as a superior mythic thrown in, their team's attacks would, at best, give the Realm Lord an itch. 15 seconds. After briefly calculating their chances, Solitary 9 nodded and said, "No problem. However, 15 seconds really is the most I can do." Tedelia's mental influence was too powerful. Even Solitary 9 felt a little overwhelmed. "No problem. If you can't handle it, I'll take over," Lifeless Thorn said, excitement flashing in his eyes as he looked at the approaching Soul Singer. Previously, killing monsters for EXP had been a chore for him. After all, none of the monsters he fought allowed him to improve. He was killing them solely for the sake of leveling up. However, after setting foot in the ruined mountain range, he finally felt that he was truly fighting a battle. Previously, he would get the exhilarating feeling of having one move decide his life or death only when fighting peak experts. Now, however, the Soul Devourers were giving him the same feeling. It was simply wonderful. As for Tedelia, the Realm Lord was an existence that could even terrify him. This was the kind of opponent he had been hankering for. "Alright, let's hurry up and head over. If we wait until the boss arrives, the others might get dragged into the fight," Yang Ya said, her head aching slightly when she saw Lifeless Thorn's excited expression. Solitary 9 and Lifeless Thorn activated the power of darkness, boosting their basic attributes by a large margin. Now, both of them were comparable with Tier 4 existences. The next moment, the 2 melee players turned into streaks of light as they charged at Tedelia. Meanwhile, Yang Ya, a druid, chanted an incantation and flew toward the Realm Lord. Simultaneously, she cast a layer of life protection on both Solitary 9 and Lifeless Thorn, the spell capable of absorbing some of the damage they took and converting it into HP raw. Tedelia bellowed in anger when it saw 2 ants charging at it, its roar echoing throughout the ruined mountain range's outermost area. As its roar spread, an invisible mental attack struck everyone. Aside from Shifeng, everyone present groaned in pain. "Good. You really are powerful." After suffering Tedelia's mental attack, which was much stronger than its ever-present mental influence, Lifeless Thorn turned deathly pale. However, when he looked at the 30-meter-tall Realm Lord, not only did he not grow fearful of the boss, but the fighting spirit in his eyes even burned brighter. He raised his spear and transformed into a lightning bolt shooting at Tedelia. Tier 3 legacy skill, Lightning Flash. With the power of darkness's buff, This attack pierced through space itself. As if he had teleported, lifeless Thorn instantly appeared before the Soul Singer. So fast. This scene surprised Unyielding Heart. There had been a 200-yard gap between Tedelia and lifeless Thorn, yet the latter had crossed this distance instantly. Unyielding Heart wasn't sure he could react to such a speed even if he activated his berserk skill. Boom. A deafening boom echoed throughout the mountains. The next moment, a black shadow fell from the sky and struck the ground heavily, the impact of the collision creating a crater over 24 meters in diameter. Inside the crater, lifeless Thorn stood, propping himself up with his spear. His hands on the spear trembled, and blood leaked out from a corner of his mouth. It was evident he had sustained a major blow. His HP had fallen by more than 460,000. What happened? Blue Gown, who was watching the clash from a distance, was dumbfounded. Lifeless Thorn's attack carried incredible power and speed. Even an actual Tier 4 mythic monster should have suffered a serious injury from it. Yet, not only did lifeless Thorn fail to inflict any damage on Tedelia, but he had even taken damage. Moreover, lifeless Thorn had lost close to 10% of his HP despite the life protection cast on him. At this rate, without additional healing, he would definitely die after 6 or 7 more exchanges. Is this monster really just a superior mythic? Everyone couldn't help doubting their eyes as they stared at the intact Soul Singer. They had seen superior mythic monsters before. Some of them had even killed one before. However, compared to those superior mythic monsters, Tedelia was like a completely different creature. However, when Shifeng, who was currently incanting, saw this scene, he wasn't surprised at all. The early stages of God's Domain served to let players adapt to God's Domain's combat style. The main God system had not only provided players with many benefits but also weakened the monsters in the game. In fact, even the level 100+ monsters that players felt were strong weren't actually at their peak condition. They were still suppressed to a certain degree. However, that was not the case for the monsters in Forbidden Lands. The monsters in these locations weren't subject to the main God system suppression and could exert 100% of their combat power. In Forbidden Lands, mythic monsters were beyond the capabilities of ordinary Tier 3 teams. Tier 3 players would need top-quality equipment and various support tools to even stand a chance. Moreover, the team would also need many experts with berserk skills. Otherwise, only one outcome awaited the team: annihilation. Not to mention, Tedelia was a bona fide superior mythic. If Shifeng himself fought Tedelia right now, he definitely wouldn't have an easy time. They would need at least 6 Tier 4 players to defeat this boss. Otherwise, challenging the Realm Lord would be sheer suicide. This was why he had tasked Lifeless Thorn's trio with only holding back Tedelia for 15 seconds. Asking them to hold the Realm Lord back for even a few seconds more was a luxury they couldn't afford. Subsequently, Solitary 9 and Lifeless Thorn activated their life-saving skills one after another to defend against Tedelia's attacks. Even Yang Ya, who served as the healer of the trio, had to activate her power of darkness. Without the additional basic attributes, she would have died from any random stray attack that hit her. One time, to defend against Tedelia's trampling, Solitary 9 activated his Tier 3 shield wall and interposed himself between the Realm Lord and his 2 companions. However, even with his life-saving skill activated, the resulting shockwave still sent the trio flying several dozen meters away. Both Lifeless Thorn and Yang Ya lost over 1 million HP from the attack, whereas Solitary 9 lost over 3 million HP. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Every second of battle placed immense pressure on the trio. Every moment they fought Tedelia felt as if death would claim them in the next second. The players spectating from afar were stupefied at this scene. This was the first time they truly understood how terrifying a superior mythic monster could be. If not for Lifeless Thorn's group having activated their berserk skills, the trio would have most likely been killed instantly. "Commander, are you not done yet?" Solitary 9 asked Shifeng through a private conversation. Previously, he thought that it would be a joke if he couldn't hold Tedelia for 15 seconds. However, he now realized that 15 seconds was truly a long time. "Good job." At this time, Shifeng had also finished chanting the final verse recorded in the Bible of Darkness. Leave the rest to me. Chapter 2758, Bible of Darkness's True Power. Chapter 2758, Bible of Darkness's True Power. Upon hearing Shifeng's words, Solitary 9, Lifeless Thorn, and Yang Ya promptly stopped attracting Tedelia's attention and dashed over to Shifeng. They chose to run to him because only their commander had a way to hold Tedelia back. If they ran in any other direction, Tedelia would definitely chase them down and crush them. Tedelia strode toward Shifeng step by step. Not only did Tedelia shake the ground with every step it took, but the mental influence it exerted over the rest of the team also increased. Some of the resting players, such as Blue Gown, even started holding their heads in pain. Are we going to fight it? Illusory Words couldn't help frowning at this situation. She simply couldn't see any way for their team to defeat Tedelia. Not only did Tedelia possess over 2 billion HP, but its combat standard was superior to ordinary refinement realm experts. Its speed was so fast that even a domain realm expert like herself could barely keep up. Such speed simply wasn't something Tier 3 players could cope with, and even a Tier 4 player like Shifeng would, at best, just match its speed. Moreover, Tedelia's strength was something only Tier 4 MTS could hope to stop. If a swordsman like Shifeng tried to tank one of the Realm Lord's attacks, he would definitely end up miserable. However, when Tedelia was only 3 steps away from Shifeng, the connections completed. Shifeng smiled as he closed the Bible of Darkness and looked at Tedelia. Let's start the second round, then. As soon as Shifeng closed the Bible of Darkness, the stormy skies above the valley shattered and transformed into a dark space covering thousands of yards. Looking at the darkness, everyone present could faintly sense that it was connected to an ancient and terrifying space. Just the aura leaking out from the dark space was enough to roil the valley's mana. The next moment, a gigantic stone door several hundred meters tall fell through the dark space and smashed into the valley, causing powerful tremors to spread throughout the valley. When Tedelia looked at this ancient door, a deep sense of fear appeared in its eyes. How can there be such a terrifying existence in this world? Unyielding Heart was shocked as he looked at the massive stone door before him. This door was undoubtedly the most terrifying item he had seen in God's domain thus far. Just looking at it allowed him to understand just how scary it was. Every magic pattern and rune engraved on the door functioned to seal its power. Whatever existence stood behind the door could most likely obliterate him with just a small strand of its power. For a moment, he even had the feeling that the opening of this door would mark the beginning of all disasters. He's not planning to open this door, right? Illusory Words eyed the stone door nervously. The door before her looked far too ominous. Its appearance alone filled her with an indescribable aversion and terror easily 100 times stronger than the fear she felt for Tedelia. However, before Illusory Words could continue this line of thought, the door began opening by itself slowly. Darkness, silence, and despair. For a moment, it felt as if all the negative emotions in the world were pouring out of this stone door, and even Shifeng felt uncomfortable in this situation. As for everyone else, their faces paled, and they knelt on the ground involuntarily, none of them daring to look at the stone door directly. Who, mans? No. You're not. Suddenly, words spoken in the abstruse demonic language flowed out of the door. Although none of the players present were knowledgeable of the language of demons, they understood what the spoken words conveyed. For a time, everyone was confused. I never thought that after so many years, you existences would be the next to summon this door. Following these words, a 3-eyed, 10-meter-tall, humanoid demon clad in black armor walked out of the stone door. The instant Tedelia saw this demon, horror overwhelmed it. It was as if the Realm Lord had just seen death itself. Actually, Shifeng himself felt dread at the humanoid demon's appearance. He never dreamed he would summon this demon. The Dark Abyss had a total of 108 demon princes, who stood at the peak of the great demons. All of them were existences second only to demon kings, and they could be considered half-step demon kings. Meanwhile, the humanoid demon standing before him was Froboro, the Lord of the Dead. His strength ranked 21st among all great demons. Weak. How weak? Froboro muttered as he looked at himself, his voice filled with dissatisfaction. He then looked at Shifeng, who held the Bible of Darkness, and said coldly, "You should know what you have done. That book isn't something you should possess, so hand it to me. This is also your only way out. Otherwise, what awaits you is eternal death." As soon as Froboro finished speaking, a powerful sense of oppression descended on Shifeng, one so uncomfortable that his expression turned ugly. As expected of one of the 108 demon princes. Its mental oppression is on par with Tier 5 existences, Shifeng sighed ruefully. Although he had long since known that the gap between Tier 4 and Tier 5 was massive, he still couldn't help feeling helpless when experiencing the might of a half-step demon king. Luckily, Shifeng wielded the Bible of Darkness, which restricted the methods Froboro could use to target him. Otherwise, the demon prince could have killed him instantly. Meanwhile, as Froboro subjected Shifeng to his mental oppression, the Bible of Darkness also sensed the offense. Immediately, chains appeared around the demon prince's body. The instant these chains appeared, Froboro's mental oppression weakened drastically. Now, the mental oppression no longer posed any threat to Shifeng whatsoever. This damned contract. I will break free from this binding one day and obtain true freedom. Froboro bellowed in rage as he glared at the pitch-black chains wrapped around his body. He then looked at Shifeng and said coldly, "Although that book prevents me from doing anything to you, don't think that you have full control over me. I can tell that you don't have much time left, based on those curses and bindings on your body. That book cannot save you. Only I can help you." "That won't be necessary. I will only become your puppet if I believe you," Shifeng said, shaking his head while smirking contemptuously. After reaching Tier 4, he had gained an inkling about the problem plaguing his soul. Initially, he thought that with the benefits from his promotion, the problems he faced would stabilize. However, it turned out that wasn't the case at all. His problems were far greater than he imagined. This feeling became even more obvious after he had used the Bible of Darkness. The Bible of Darkness had been secretly eroding his soul all this time. He couldn't help but admit that this godlike item truly couldn't be controlled easily. It was much more dangerous than magic weapons. However, it was also impossible for him to abandon the Bible of Darkness. The road to reaching higher tiers was incredibly difficult. Only by grasping every available opportunity would he have a chance of becoming a god. Otherwise, everything he did would be for naught. One example would be the soul mark he received from a faux saint devourer he defeated some time ago. It was precisely because he had exploited this opportunity that he had managed to strengthen his soul, which, in turn, strengthened his resistance to that mysterious NPC's soul curse. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived until now. Shifeng then looked at Froboro and said, "I might not be able to control you completely, but you should know that as your summoner, I can forcibly control part of your power." The Bible of Darkness was his greatest assurance in venturing to the ruined mountain range this time. Venturing deep into the neutral map with just his personal strength was impossible. After all, Tedelia alone was already more than enough to make him flee. "You'll regret this. Controlling the power of demons is beyond you. The more you use it, the deeper you will sink, until eventually your soul is consumed completely. Thank you for the warning, but don't think you demons will have an easy time devouring me." After saying so, Shifeng used the Bible of Darkness to erase Froboro's consciousness and gain control over a portion of the demon prince's strength. A level 135 demon prince. Even with just 70% of Froboro's strength, he could roam about the ruined mountain range's outer area without any worries. The conversation between Shifeng and Froboro lasted for only a short moment. Hence, Tedelia, who had been petrified by the stone door and the Lord of the Dead, was still idle. However, after Shifeng took control of Froboro's body, Tedelia immediately noticed something amiss. The demon prince's aura and mental oppression had weakened significantly. Moreover, Froboro could display hostility toward it now. After realizing what had just happened, Tedelia pounced on Shifeng without hesitation, sending one of its mountain-sized claws smashing ruthlessly at the tiny human. Shifeng immediately felt as if the space around him had compressed 100-fold. Not only did his body feel a lot heavier, but even time had started slow. Tier 4 innate skill, Sundering Earth. This was the first time Tedelia had resorted to a skill. Previously, when fighting ants like lifeless thorn, it couldn't even be bothered to use skills. However, the only thing on its mind right now was to kill Shifeng as quickly as possible. Under intense pressure from the space around him, Shifeng looked up at Tedelia and smiled. "You're too late." Even before Shifeng finished speaking, Froboro, who stood in front of Shifeng, waved his hand abruptly, and a pitch-black spear of flames condensed in his hand. He then swung the spear at Tedelia's approaching claw. Although Froboro's spear was made of flames, it did not feel scorching at all. On the contrary, it gave off an extreme chill that froze the surrounding space. Time itself seemed to freeze momentarily. Boom! Space shattered and turned into nothingness. The impact of the collision between the two attacks caused the ground to sink. With the exception of Shifeng, the resulting shockwave also sent everyone flying over 500 yards away and inflicted damage on them ranging between tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. As for Tedelia, its massive body shot backward over 100 yards, leveling the terrain in its path. The next moment, illusory words, unyielding heart, and the others, who got blown away, gaped in shock as they looked at Tedelia. Chapter 2759, Half-Step Demon King. Chapter 2759, Half-Step Demon King. Is this the real trump card Black Flame has been hiding all this time? Illusory words and unyielding heart were shocked as they stared at the three-eyed demon hovering proudly in the sky. At the same time, they revealed bitter smiles on their faces. Froboro, Lord of the Dead, Demon Prince, level 135 HP 13 billion. They had long known that people like Shifeng would always keep a trump card hidden. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to the dangerous ruined mountain range even though he had reached Tier 4. However, they never imagined that Shifeng's trump card would be this terrifying. The man had actually summoned a demon prince from the dark abyss and controlled it like a puppet to fight for him. A demon prince was an existence capable of rivaling Tier 5 existences. In terms of life rating, a demon prince was above even superior mythic monsters. Not to mention, Froboro was even a demon prince with a title. Calling him a half-step demon king wouldn't be an exaggeration. If the various superpowers were to find out about this power, they would most likely have very ugly expressions on their faces. Any demon prince that possessed a title had earned their title by slaughtering countless people in God's domain. In fact, these titled demon princes were responsible for the destruction of some kingdoms in God's domain. For an existence capable of single-handedly destroying an entire kingdom, destroying a super guild's guild city would be child's play. In reality, Shifeng himself had also entertained the same fantasies as illusory words and unyielding heart. However, these thoughts remained merely thoughts. After his promotion to Tier 4, both his concentration and mana perception had gained a qualitative improvement. Thanks to these improvements, he discovered a small trace of dark energy lingering around his soul. The Bible of Darkness possessed incredible power. In fact, some legendary items would even seem weak compared to it. This situation was inconsistent with God's domain's rules. In God's domain, one had to pay a price corresponding to the power gained. This was the balance of God's domain. However, the Bible of Darkness didn't seem balanced to him. The power it offered its wielder was far greater than the cost of using it. Now, the Bible of Darkness's detriments were thoroughly revealed. His soul had become tainted with dark energy. Although the dark energy lingering around his soul was incredibly weak, its purity was exceptionally high, equal to the energy found in 7 luminaries crystals. Ordinary power couldn't expel it. And the more he used the Bible of Darkness's power, the stronger and purer this dark energy became. Particularly, when he summoned Froboro, the rate at which this dark energy grew had skyrocketed. Hence, unless absolutely necessary, he didn't dare casually use the Bible of Darkness's power for now. Meanwhile, as everyone was stunned by Froboro's power, Tedelia, who had been knocked backward, let loose a deafening roar like an enraged beast. Tedelia's originally translucent body turned blood red and enlarged significantly. Now, the Realm Lord easily reached a height of 50 meters. Simultaneously, a ripple of power spread from its body, reaching 500 yards away and causing the ground to sink. What a strong gravity domain. Shifeng frowned when Tedelia's gravity domain reached him. Despite his mana domain and tier 4 physique, moving inside Tedelia's gravity domain was actually difficult. Now, he couldn't even exhibit half of his normal speed, let alone his strength. If tier 3 players stood within this gravity domain right now, they would most likely be crushed to death. Fortunately, Froboro, whom Shifeng controlled, wasn't particularly affected by this gravity domain. His speed and strength had been reduced by only 20% or so. He still held an advantage over Tedelia. So, this is the Demon Prince's power? Shifeng was astonished by this situation. Despite both him and Froboro being tier 4 existences, there was a tremendous gap between them. He only had basic control over Froboro's body, utilizing Froboro's mana and frightening concentration was beyond him. While these two aspects might not seem very important, they were crucial for tier 4 existences to maximize the use of their basic attributes. At this time, Shifeng couldn't exhibit even 10% of Froboro's true combat power. Despite that, Froboro could still overwhelm Tedelia. All Shifeng needed to do now was control Froboro and have the Demon Prince pin down the Soul Singer. If everyone else helped out in attacking Tedelia, slaying the superior mythic wouldn't be impossible. However, Tedelia had no intention of letting Shifeng realize his plans. Chanting an incantation, the Realm Lord repeatedly shattered the ground around itself and gathered the scattered rubble. In just 3 seconds, a meteorite with a 400-yard radius had formed in midair. A tier 4 curse. Shifeng's complexion darkened when he saw the meteorite. A tier 4 curse cast by a superior mythic would possess power at the tier 5 standard. A single strike from such an attack was more than enough to demolish a city's defensive magic array. As a tier 4 player, if he got struck by this attack, he would die without question. At this time, let alone Shifeng, even illusory words, unyielding heart, and the other players standing over 500 yards away were stunned by Tedelia's attack. Helpless smiles appeared on their faces. Once this tier 4 curse landed, none of them would survive. They couldn't even interrupt the spell. Damn it. Why can't I use his mana? Shifeng felt a huge headache in this situation. If Froboro were to rely on only his physical body, the Demon Prince definitely wouldn't be able to shrug off a tier 4 curse. Moreover, even if Froboro could endure the attack, both Shifeng and the rest of his team couldn't. Escaping was also impossible at this point. After all, the activation of a tier 4 curse would place a seal on the space of the affected region. Aside from shattering the tier 4 curse directly, the only other way to survive a tier 4 curse would be to endure it. However, neither of these two options were viable for Shifeng. If he couldn't control Froboro's mana, he wouldn't be able to use any of the Demon Prince's skills or spells, he could only have the Demon Prince fight hand-to-hand. While Shifeng was thinking about how to resolve this tier 4 curse, Tedelia completed the incantation for the tier 4 curse meteorite collapse. Boom! The next moment, the enormous meteorite that had taken shape fell from the sky like a real meteor. Damn it! Seeing the descending meteorite, Shifeng gritted his teeth and began calling the dark energy hidden in the depths of his soul. It's all or nothing now. As a tool capable of controlling all demons, the Bible of Darkness shouldn't be limited to turning demons into simple meat puppets. Shifeng believed it could exert further control over them. Meanwhile, a demon's power wasn't limited to just mana. They also had access to the terrifying power of darkness. In other words, the power of darkness was the source of strength for demons. Yet, when Shifeng used the Bible of Darkness, he could perform only simple manipulation of demons. This obviously didn't seem right. The instant Shifeng manipulated the strand of dark energy within his soul, it actually formed a connection with Froboro's source of power. This is... Shifeng was stupefied. At this moment, he felt that he was Froboro. He now could see what Froboro saw and feel what Froboro felt. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Is this what it feels like to be in existence approaching Tier 5 Demon Kings? Not only did Shifeng not feel the slightest bit anxious or fearful of the descending meteorite, but it even looked like a toy to him. Be it the surrounding mana, terrain, or sky, he could now perceive everything with extreme clarity. Even the operating principles of the profound magic elements looked far less complex in his opinion. Meanwhile, just when everyone else on the team shook their heads and gave up, Froboro suddenly raised a hand under Chifeng's control and directed it at the massive meteorite. The next moment, a gigantic hand made of mana appeared out of thin air and grabbed the meteorite, then lightly squeezed. Boom! A deafening explosion occurred in midair, and the meteorite, which was over 400 meters in radius, instantly shattered into dust. Space around the hand also transformed into a black void. Chapter 2760, Illusory Sword Slays Realm Lord. Chapter 2760, Illusory Sword Slays Realm Lord. The sky shattered, and the resulting void storm dyed the sky black as it threatened to devour everything on this land. The void storm was so powerful that even Tier 4 players would suffer severe damage or death if they got too close. So strong. He crushed a Tier 4 curse with his hand. Is he really just a Tier 4 demon? Everyone present gasped at the power of the demon prince Chifeng controlled. Froboro's might had thoroughly shattered their perception of Tier 4 demons in God's domain. In fact, even Chifeng himself felt shocked by this outcome. Amazing. A demon prince can actually control mana to such a terrifying level. No wonder they're known as half-step demon kings. Their actual combat power is definitely at the Tier 5 standard. Previously, Chifeng had merely thought to use Froboro's mana to resist Tedelia's Tier 4 curse. However, the mana hand the demon prince conjured had actually shattered the Tier 4 curse. The demon prince's power was beyond his imagination. Nevertheless, the most amazing aspect about Froboro would have to be the mana he could condense. The strength of the condensed mana surpassed even Chifeng's mana when he executed Holy Devour. Meanwhile, Froboro had already exhibited such astounding mana just by casually condensing it into the shape of a hand. Had the demon prince executed a mana technique just now, the result would have definitely been mind-blowing. The power of the attack might even reach the intermediate Tier 5 standard. Usually, if a superior mythic monster used a Tier 4 curse, the spell's power would only be at the entry level of Tier 5, not even reaching the basic Tier 5 standard. However, the mana hand Froboro manifested just now was undoubtedly at the basic Tier 5 standard. If the attack's power reached the intermediate Tier 5 standard, the resulting spatial storm would have had a radius of several thousand yards instead of just several hundred yards. Chifeng couldn't help reveling in Froboro's power. After all, the feeling of wielding such power was simply wonderful. This was especially true for Froboro's perception of an affinity for mana. When controlling the demon prince, Chifeng could feel his comprehension of the operating principles of mana becoming a lot clearer than before. This wasn't a sensation he could experience with just an ordinary Tier 4 physique. If I can maintain this state, I can probably break through my mana body's 100% threshold in just 1 or 2 hours. My control of mana might even improve, and getting promoted to a Grandmaster Magician would be far less of a struggle. The gap in physique and life rating wasn't something that basic attributes could compensate for. If the effects of basic attributes on one's combat power were calculated by addition and subtraction, then the effects of physique and life rating would be calculated by multiplication and division. This was also why the dragon race stood at the apex of all races. Even with the same basic attributes, a dragon would be many times stronger than a human. For the same reason, dragons, fallen angels, and such creatures were invincible among those of the same tier, with some even capable of transcending tiers. Based on the power Froboro displayed, the demon prince's life rating was probably close to rivaling dragons. However, as Chifeng was savoring this wonderful moment, a stinging pain came from the depths of his mind. He paled in agony and almost staggered and fell to the ground. Sure enough, the system won't allow players to be immersed in this feeling for long. Chifeng smiled bitterly when he sensed the state of his concentration and the taint on his soul. He had manipulated Froboro's mana for less than 3 seconds, yet not only did he expend 10% of his concentration, but the dark energy in his soul had also grown significantly stronger. The corrosive effect of manipulating Froboro's mana was 1/3 of summoning the demon prince himself. Meanwhile, Tedelia, who had initially cowered after seeing its Tier 4 curse shattered, narrowed its 6 eyes when it noticed the intensity of Chifeng's aura plummeting. It could tell that Shifeng was no longer in his best condition. Immediately, Tedelia's 3 heads began chanting another Tier 4 curse, intending to kill Shifeng while he was weakened. "Do you think I'll give you another chance?" Upon noticing Tedelia's actions, Shifeng connected the dark energy in his soul with Frobero's source of darkness once more. Frobero's aura recovered to its peak. The demon prince's aura was so terrifying that even illusory words and the others, standing several hundred yards away, trembled reflexively. "Stay down." Shifeng had Frobero brandish the fire spear without hesitation, gathering both mana and power of darkness for an attack. In addition, Shifeng even executed Light Shadow for this attack. However, as he was executing the mana technique indirectly, through Frobero, he failed to execute the complete Light Shadow. Even so, the resulting attack was still magnitudes stronger than the earlier mana hand. The next moment, illusory spears rained down from the sky and bombarded Tedelia's heads. The attacks were so quick and powerful that the Soul Singer couldn't dodge them in time, its body getting pummeled into the ground. Cracks extending several thousand yards formed on the ground due to the impacts. The violent trembling of the earth toppled everyone on Shifeng's team and forced them to sit on the ground. By the time the land stopped shaking, a crater with a 300-yard radius had formed in Tedelia's position. As for the Realm Lord itself, its body had sunk several dozen meters into the ground, only its 3 heads remaining above ground. -1,165,446,428, a damage value exceeding 1 billion emerged slowly above Tedelia's head as its HP bar fell by a significant chunk. Even its life aura had weakened slightly. Crap. The commander is insane. He actually managed to summon such a demon. Solitary 9 was secretly astonished when he saw the damage and destruction Frobero caused. At this rate, the fight could end in just another dozen hits or so. The boss monster that previously filled their minds with only thoughts of escape had been beaten down like a dog. The heavy injuries Tedelia suffered had also caused it to lose 30% of its basic attributes. There was simply no comparison between Tedelia and Frobero. "Alright, stop daydreaming. All of you activate your berserk skills and fight the boss together with the demon prince. We must get rid of the boss now. Otherwise, none of us will get out alive." Shifeng ordered weakly through the team chat as he sat down on the ground. He had used his full power to launch that previous blow. He had even executed a partial light shadow. As a result, he had expended 30% of his concentration and further enhanced the dark energy in his soul. Now, he was in an incomparably weakened state, and just controlling Frobero required all his focus. If they allowed Tedelia to recover and use another Tier 4 curse, they would team wipe. Hence, they needed to finish Tedelia while the Realm Lord was still weakened. They definitely could not afford to give it a chance to catch a breather. Upon hearing Shifeng's weak voice, Unyielding Heart immediately understood their situation. Hurriedly, he shouted through the team chat, "Everyone from Unyielding Soul, follow me. Everyone from Crimson Emperor, attack together. Activate your berserk skills." Illusory words also commanded her subordinates to take action. She, too, understood that now was not the time to hold back. Immediately, 20+ peak experts from Azura, Unyielding Soul, and Crimson Emperor activated their berserk skills and rushed toward Tedelia simultaneously. However, the Soul Singer also realized the precarious situation it was in right now. After dragging its heavily injured body out of the crater, it fled without hesitation. "Don't even think of getting away." Shifeng did not give Tedelia any opportunities to escape. Controlling Frobero, he had the Demon Prince launch another attack at the Realm Lord. However, as Shifeng could execute only simple attacks with Frobero right now, Tedelia managed to defend against the Demon Prince's attack despite being heavily injured. -94,376,414, a damage value nearing 100 million appeared above Tedelia's head when its claw collided with Frobero's fire spear. Disregarding the damage, Tedelia immediately jumped into the air to flee. However, Shifeng was no ordinary expert but someone at the peak of the Ascension realm. Even though he was in a mentally weakened state and couldn't get Frobero to exert his actual combat power, he could still use the Demon Prince to pin down Tedelia. Every one of the attacks he executed with Froboro targeted Tedelia's vitals, forcing the Realm Lord to defend itself. Meanwhile, Unyielding Heart and the others arrived within attack range and immediately joined the battle. All of them possessed power rivaling Tier 4 mythic monsters. Although they still couldn't afford to face Tedelia in a frontal confrontation, the damage they inflicted was significant. The next moment, normal attacks dealing over 2 million damage each, coupled with the occasional Tier 3 skill reaping over 10 million damage, landed on the Realm Lord one after another. As Tedelia was already struggling to deal with Froboro, it was utterly powerless against the 20-plus players' assault. It could only let the players bombard it with attacks as they pleased. 83%. 72%. 54%. Time passed quickly, with one side sticking close to the other. One side was fleeing desperately, while the other side was pursuing and attacking ruthlessly. Fortunately, Shifeng and the others dealt sufficiently high damage, dragging Tedelia's HP down continuously. After 3 minutes into the battle, Tedelia's HP hit 30%. However, at this time, the peak experts on Shifeng's team lost the Berserk skills effects one after another. Immediately, the team's overall DPS plummeted to just barely over Tedelia's battle recovery. At this rate, they wouldn't be able to finish the Realm Lord quickly. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. 20 minutes. When Tedelia's HP fell to 8%, its aura suddenly changed. The Realm Lord had finally recovered from its weakened state and was now back in peak condition. Die. Humans. Tedelia bellowed in human tongue, a hint of madness and contempt appearing in its eyes. It then began casting a Tier 4 curse. Damn it. We still didn't make it. Unyielding Heart's complexion sank when he saw another meteorite taking shape in the sky. They had fought for more than 20 minutes, yet they still failed to slay the weakened Tedelia. Now that the Realm Lord was casting another Tier 4 curse, the raid was as good as over. The one who's going to die is you. Some distance away from the battlefield, Shifeng stood up abruptly, a glimmer of light blooming in his eyes. He then manipulated the dark energy in his soul once more. Compared to the 2 previous instances, Shifeng was much more familiar with manipulating Froboro's power this time. The next moment, Froboro wielded his spear like a great sword and entered the stance for executing Light Shadow. The mana around the Demon Prince began rampaging. Simultaneously, an illusory sword 100 meters long appeared in midair. Die. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. At this moment, Shifeng had exhausted every bit of concentration he had left to have Froboro execute Light Shadow. Boom. The illusory sword descended instantly. For a moment, everyone even had the misconception that the sky had been split apart. 1 second later, Tedelia's 50-meter-tall body divided into 2 halves and collapsed to the ground. The Realm Lord's HP zeroed out, the boss becoming deader than dead. Chapter 2761, Level Skyrockets. Chapter 2761, Level Skyrockets. It's dead? That was close. For a moment there, I thought we would all get flattened. I am never going to go near superior mythics ever again before reaching Tier 4. These aren't things Tier 3 players like ourselves can do anything against. After everyone saw Tedelia bisected, they slumped down to the ground and breathed out a sigh of relief, rendered speechless by this narrow escape from death. However, many people also felt fortunate about their survival and couldn't help laughing happily. As for Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart, both were too tired to pay attention to Tedelia. They only wanted to sit down, rest, and relax their minds. However, before anyone could catch their breath, divine sounds descended from the sky and echoed throughout the valley, so melodious that everyone felt intoxicated. As expected of a first kill in the ruined mountain range. Even without divine providence, the loot's quality can actually trigger a divine hymn. Shifeng, who was lying on the ground, was a little surprised by this situation. He never thought that the first kill of a Realm Lord would yield such excellent loot. Initially, he had been thinking of using divine providence and personally dealing the finishing blow to Tedelia. However, the situation at the end did not permit him to do so. As a result, he could only rely on Froboro to finish the Realm Lord. While the divine hymn resounded in the valley, Bright rays of light enveloped all the survivors. Shifeng, who was initially at 78% of level 125, leveled up twice and reached 4% of level 127. Everyone else leveled up at least 3 times, with some even leveling up 4 times. The abundance of the EXP awarded utterly dumbfounded everyone. A superior mythic boss actually awards so much EXP? If it were before, we wouldn't get this much EXP even after killing 30 superior mythics. With this, we save at least half a month of grinding. It's a pity that everyone else died. If not, they would have saved on plenty of grinding time as well. Everyone couldn't help sighing over the abundant EXP from Tedelia. On one hand, they felt grateful that they could save plenty of time. On the other hand, they felt guilty for those who died. Not only did the dead players not receive any EXP from the raid, but they would even lose 1 level after resurrection. And even if Illusory Words and the other healers of the team resurrected them, they would still lose nearly half a level's worth of EXP. Only Shifeng remained unfazed by this situation. Setting aside that this raid happened after the first major update, just the fact that Tedelia was both a superior mythic monster and a realm lord already meant that the EXP granted upon its death would be incredibly lavish. The descent of a divine hymn would also increase the EXP awarded. Furthermore, Tedelia was a level 128 monster, whereas most of the players on the team hadn't even reached level 120 yet. The bonus EXP these players received would be significant. However, it would be almost impossible for them to level up so quickly again in the future. After all, each region of the ruined mountain range had only one realm lord, which took 5 natural days or more to respawn. Moreover, the realm lords for each region weren't fixed. Hence, although their team had secured information on Tedelia the Soul Singer, this information would be useless because the next realm lord that spawned in this region would probably be some other superior mythic monster. It was almost impossible for players to come across the same realm lord multiple times in forbidden lands such as the ruined mountain range. Every boss that spawned would be new. Hence, players couldn't prepare for specific bosses and could only rely on brute strength or tools to secure victory. New. Standing up slowly, Shifeng looked at his teammates and commanded, "Start resurrecting the others. Thorn, you guys patrol the surroundings. Make sure no monsters come ambushing us." Although Frobero's presence had scared the surrounding monsters into fleeing and the likelihood of an ambush was low, it never hurt to be careful. After all, whether it was a forbidden land for all life or a forbidden land for humans, a single mistake was all it took to team wipe. "Leave it to us." Lifeless Thorn nodded before leaving to patrol the surroundings together with Cleansing Whistle and the others. As for Yang Ya, Illusory Words, and the other surviving healers, they began resurrecting the team members killed by the Soul Devourers. Although these people had died because they had their concentration sucked dry, their souls did not get damaged. Hence, resurrection was still possible. Only, they would be in a weakened state for several hours after getting resurrected and wouldn't be able to participate in battle right away. While the others were busy with their respective tasks, Shifeng slowly made his way to Tedelia's corpse and waited for the loot to appear. Regarding Tedelia's loot, none of the members of Unyielding Soul or Crimson Emperor gave it much thought. After all, Shifeng was the organizer of this team. Before they went on this expedition, they had already agreed that all discoveries made and items obtained would belong to Shifeng. This was the basis for the cooperation of their 3 guilds. Moreover, even without the agreement, both Unyielding Souls and Crimson Emperor's peak experts would be too ashamed to ask for any loot. From start to end, they had merely played a supporting role and barely did anything during the raid. In fact, if not for Shifeng landing the finishing blow, they wouldn't be alive right now. They also wouldn't have leveled up 3 or 4 times and gained a 15-day leveling advantage over the outside world's peak experts. One could say that the EXP harvest alone already made their trip to the ruined mountain range worthwhile. Not to mention, they also got to learn about the ruined mountain range and find out just how dangerous the neutral map was. With this information, their 2 guilds would have a much easier time exploring the neutral map in the future. Let's hope the loot isn't too bad. I'd even settle for just 1 or 2 tier 4 skill books or a legacy guidance fragment, Shifeng prayed inwardly when he saw the dark clouds in the sky gradually scattering. Compared to the outside world, the ruined mountain range was impoverished. Unlike what most people of the outside world imagined, the ruined mountain range wasn't a place where one could just kill a few random mobs and get rich quick. On the contrary, be it forbidden lands for humans or forbidden lands for all life, both were scarce in material resources. Instead, the reason players and NPCs deemed forbidden lands to be rich in resources was the legacy resources found there. In the current God's domain, the kingdoms and empires controlled Tier 3 legacy resources. In the case of Tier 4 legacies, though, even the kingdoms and empires barely had any, some had none at all. However, the various forbidden lands still contained a considerable number of legacies for Tier 4 and above. Hence, forbidden lands were far richer in legacies than the maps in the outside world. Meanwhile, after players reached Tier 4, there were 3 ways they could improve themselves. The first and simplest method was upgrading their weapons and equipment. Such items were readily available in the various kingdoms and empires. The second method was significantly more difficult, obtaining Tier 4 skill and spell books. After reaching Tier 4, aside from spending legacy skill points to obtain Tier 4 legacy skills, the only other way players could obtain Tier 4 skills was through skill books. However, the monsters in the various kingdoms, empires, and standard neutral maps almost never dropped Tier 4 skill books. Only the monsters in Forbidden Lands would drop these items. Moreover, only monsters at the mythic rank or above dropped them, and the drop rate was incredibly low. Tier 4 skills and spells were crucial in deciding a Tier 4 player's strength. Oftentimes, the result of a duel between Tier 4 players could be predicted based on the number of Tier 4 skills and spells the two sides held. This was because Tier 4 skills were magnitudes stronger than Tier 3 skills, with some capable of instant killing players of the same tier. Therefore, after reaching Tier 4, acquiring Tier 4 skill books was key to increasing a player's strength. The improvement players could gain from a Tier 4 skill could rival fragmented legendary items. Moreover, unlike fragmented legendary items, learned skills and spells didn't have a chance of dropping upon death. The third method to improve one's strength was also the most difficult one, obtaining legacy guidances for Tier 4 or above. After players reached Tier 4, levels would no longer be as important as before. Even if players reached level 150 and fulfilled the minimum condition for promotion to Tier 5, they wouldn't necessarily reach Tier 5. Getting promoted to Tier 5 was far more difficult than reaching Tier 4. For the Tier 4 promotion, players only needed to find their Tier 4 legacy land and learn a Tier 4 legacy skill within the allotted time. However, there were no such challenges for the Tier 5 promotion. Players weren't required to complete a troublesome promotion quest, nor did they need to search for some random location. Instead, getting promoted to Tier 5 was a very straightforward process. Players just had to raise their concentration to the Tier 5 standard, then reconstruct their own mana bodies, which would allow their essence to achieve a qualitative improvement. This was how one became a saint. Upon reaching Tier 5, players would no longer be an ordinary human. Their life rating would reach an extraordinary level. This was why very few players and NPCs would ever manage to reach Tier 5 in God's domain. Those who did would be dragons and phoenixes among men. The first step to reaching Tier 5 was breaking through the limits of one's mana body at Tier 3. While this might seem like an insignificant step, it would provide players with great help when they tried to reconstruct their mana bodies at Tier 4. The most difficult step was going from 0 to 1. Meanwhile, Violet Cloud had already taken the first step on the path to Tier 5. Meanwhile, legacy guidances could aid players in understanding the operating principles of mana because they recorded the comprehensions of ancient powerhouses on mana and the methods to utilize mana. Some even contained methods and experiences for constructing mana bodies. This was also why Shifeng had chosen to receive the Crimson-Eyed Sword Saint's legacy guidance without hesitation. At Tier 3, despite receiving samples of mana bodies, players still faced incredible difficulty constructing their mana bodies. If players wished to get promoted to Tier 5, they would need to construct a mana body that was at least 10 times stronger. The difficulty of this feat was simply unimaginable. Hence, legacy guidances were incredibly important. Only by continuously learning about mana and mana bodies could players construct a mana body rivaling Tier 5 existences. Otherwise, they would remain at Tier 4 for the rest of their lives. However, obtaining legacy guidances was easier said than done. Legacy guidance fragments were no less rare than fragmented legendary items. Generally, only the bosses of Forbidden Lands at the Realm Lord status or higher would have a small chance of dropping this treasure. This was also one of the reasons very few independent players ever managed to reach Tier 5. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After all, let alone soloing superior mythics of the same level, even soloing superior mythics of a lower level was impossible for Tier 4 experts. Normally, raiding such monsters required the cooperation of multiple Tier 4 players. Moreover, even if players killed a superior mythic, they wouldn't necessarily obtain a legacy guidance fragment. And even if a fragment did drop, how many people would get a share of it? In addition, the guilds would frantically contest for these bosses, which further increased the difficulty of reaching Tier 5 for independent players. Unless one possessed a sufficiently strong backer or heaven-defying talent, Tier 5 would forever be beyond one's reach. Meanwhile, as Shifeng was praying and looking to the sky with an exhausted expression, dozens of dazzling items descended around him. The appearance of these items immediately attracted the ambient mana from several hundred yards around. When Shifeng spotted a strange stone sculpture of a monster among these items, his eyes instantly lit up. He even rubbed his eyes, thinking that he had seen wrong. An ancient beast sculpture? Did this monster swallow an ancient god's treasury? Chapter 2762, Ancient Treasure. Chapter 2762, Ancient Treasure. While the strange beast statue held Shifeng's attention, the other players patrolling and resting in the distance noticed the several dozen items falling from the sky. Their eyes immediately widened in shock. Crap! What's up with this loot? I've never seen so many epic items and legendary materials dropping at once. The boss is a level 128 superior mythic, so the epic items it dropped can definitely be used up to level 150. Despite making so many contributions to the guild, I only managed to get a pair of epic braces that can be used up to level 130. With all those epic items, I could probably fully gear myself in epic items. Despite everyone being peak experts or better, they still grew envious when they saw Tedelia's loot. Rather, it was inevitable that they would be envious. Although epic weapons and equipment had become a lot more common in the current God's domain, the majority of them could be used only up to level 100. Those that could be used up to level 120 were few and far between. As for epic items that could be used up to level 150, even the various superpowers wouldn't have more than 30 pieces. This wasn't because the various superpowers were slacking on killing level 100 plus mythic monsters, but because mythic monsters only had a tiny chance of dropping epic weapons and equipment that could be used up to level 150. Now, however, Tedelia had dropped over 10 epic items. Needless to say, every one of these epic items would be good up to level 150. After all, Tedelia was a level 128 superior mythic. According to their past experiences, the epic items dropped by level 120 plus superior mythic bosses would almost certainly have their level limit set at 150. However, the epic weapons and equipment dropped were only the tip of the iceberg. What truly made everyone's eyes glow were the legendary materials in the loot. Legendary materials could be used to create customized epic weapons and equipment, which would definitely be top tier among epic items. However, like level 150 epic items, the drop rate for legendary materials was pitifully low. Even level 100 plus superior mythics would, at most, drop inferior legendary materials. More often than not, they would drop only epic materials. Nonetheless, Tedelia had dropped as many as 7 legendary materials. In other words, one could produce 7 customized epic weapons and equipment with a level limit of level 150. Not to mention, the 20-plus inferior legendary materials Tedelia dropped could also be used to produce top-tier epic weapons and equipment. In other words, Tedelia alone had essentially dropped over 30 level 150 epic weapons and equipment, more than enough to fully arm 2 players in level 150 epic items. This was something impossible even for the various superpowers at this stage of the game. As expected of a forbidden land. Just the loot of a superior mythic boss here equals the loot of 3 or 4 superior mythic bosses in the outside world. The loot's quality is also significantly better. Unyielding Heart also couldn't help his astonishment at this scene. At the same time, he resolved that once he reached Tier 4, he would absolutely bring a team here to explore the ruined mountain range. However, unlike everyone else, Shifeng paid no attention to the weapons, equipment, and materials Delia dropped. Instead, he stepped forward, collected a 1-meter-tall beast statue, and stored it in his epic spatial bag without hesitation. In Shifeng's opinion, even the combined value of all the other items Delia dropped couldn't compare to the value of this beast statue. Sacred beast statue, soul-devouring beast, epic rank, unique item, one of 12 stone sculptures of sacred beasts made by Barstan. It holds incredible power. One shouldn't underestimate the beast statue just because it was an epic item. For Tier 4 players and above, this beast statue was easily 1,000 times more valuable than legendary items. An ancient god in God's domain, Barstan was known as the god of elements by everyone. Legend had it that he could control all magic elements, and he was incredibly strong even among the ancient gods. In God's domain, any item belonging to a god would already be an amazing item, let alone an ancient god's possession. The 12 sacred beast statues were one of Baristan's earliest creations. To both gods and ancient gods, these statues were trash. However, to Tier 4 players, these statues were priceless treasures. On the surface, the 12 sacred beast statues were only intended as room decor. However, if one placed these statues in areas with incredibly dense mana, the statues would generate a special signal. This signal allowed players inside the room to perceive the operating principles of a particular magic element. Although the granted perception was vague, it was still much better than blindly trying to feel and deduce the operating principles of the magic elements. Moreover, the effect stacked. With more beast statues collected, not only would one get to perceive more magic elements, but the intensity of the granted perception would also increase. In the past, a super guild had discovered an ancient god's treasury, and after working together with several superpowers and incurring countless casualties, the super guild had successfully raided the treasury. They had discovered 3 of the 12 sacred beast statues inside the treasury, one of them a medium-sized statue at the fragmented legendary rank. Due to these 3 beast statues, the super guild that found the treasury had ended up one of the 12 great guilds within a short period. Now, Shifeng had merely killed a superior mythic-ranked realm lord, yet he had actually acquired a sacred beast statue. This was simply unbelievable. I really lucked out this time. Although not even one fragmented legendary item dropped, the boss actually dropped an intact legacy guidance crystal, besides one of the 12 sacred beast statues. If any of those superpowers in the past found out about this, they would most likely go crazy from envy. Shifeng inwardly grew ecstatic as he picked up a crimson memory crystal from the ground. Normally, the legacy guidances players could obtain in Forbidden Lands were only fragmented crystals. Due to the instability of the mana inside these fragments, they would disappear after one use. However, an intact legacy guidance crystal was a different story. As the mana inside an intact crystal was incredibly stable, players could use it several times. Moreover, each use cost only 100 magic crystals. However, as these legacy guidance crystals were quite ancient, even a complete one could be used only 9 times. Regardless, an intact legacy guidance crystal was as valuable as a legendary item because it recorded far more information than a fragmented crystal. A single use of an intact crystal was easily worth 10 uses of fragmented crystals. In the past, some superpowers were even willing to exchange a legendary item for an intact legacy guidance crystal. However, nobody had ever taken up the offer. This was especially true for guilds and adventurer teams. After all, the legacy guidance crystal could lead to the birth of a Tier 5 player, which was way more valuable than a legendary item. In God's domain, unless Tier 6 God-ranked experts made an appearance, Tier 5 players would stand at the pinnacle of the game. The resources a Tier 5 player could acquire with their strength far exceeded the value of a legendary item. Several minutes later, Shifeng finished storing all of the dropped items in his spatial bag. He then let everyone rest for an additional 10 minutes before leading them toward the Earthfall secret land. Shifeng had no choice but to position the still weakened members at the center of the team. He also had Froboro open up the path for them, clearing out the level 125+ Great Lords and Grand Lords that assaulted their team on the way. He had no intention of resting whatsoever. "Commander, aren't we in too much of a hurry?" Solitary 9 asked in a whisper as he looked at Shifeng, who still had a deathly pale complexion. The fight with Tidelia left everyone's concentration below the 10% threshold. They could fall unconscious at any time. Shifeng was no exception. Yet, after resting for just a short while, Shifeng had led them deeper into the ruined mountain range without hesitation. At this point, they had already been running for close to 2 hours, and everyone had constantly been fighting throughout this period. Moreover, the monsters they fought all had considerably high combat standards and high basic attributes. Although Froboro took on most of the monsters for them, the occasional monster still slipped by. And if they weren't careful, they would be easily overwhelmed by these monsters. "I know, but we don't have much time left," Shifeng said while controlling Froboro. Smiling bitterly, he continued, "At this point, I can no longer summon a second demon prince. If the duration of this one lapses before we reach our destination, we'll die a miserable death." Upon hearing Shifeng's words, Solitary 9 looked at the endless monsters around them and got goosebumps. At the same time, he subconsciously raised his shield and stood closer to Shifeng. If not for the demon prince, they would definitely be doomed. In fact, they wouldn't be able to cope with all these monsters, even with several Tier 4 experts on the team. After all, fighting in the ruined mountain range cost a lot of stamina and concentration. It was impossible for players to fight endlessly. "Move faster. We're almost there," Shifeng urged everyone through the team chat after taking a look at his map. At Shifeng's words, everyone hurriedly closed the distance to Froboro. The team then broke out in a mad dash while blocking the attacks coming from the surrounding monsters. After frantically advancing for another dozen minutes or so, the team finally discovered a huge cave in the valley, with an entrance several dozen meters high. The cave exerted a mental influence that rivaled Tidelia's, making everyone feel discomfortable. Guild leader Black Flame, "Is this the place you were talking about?" Illusory Words asked anxiously. When she looked at the nearby cave, she got a sense of depression and uncertainty. A hint of fear had even appeared in her heart. If she was already experiencing such feelings even before entering the cave, it wasn't hard to imagine how dangerous it would be inside. Looking at the God Slayer's map, Shifeng said with certainty, "It should be here." But that mental influence, Unyielding Heart had goosebumps as he looked at the cave. If another monster like Tidelia emerged from the cave, they really would be on their way to the underworld. The mental influence is indeed considerable, but we went to great lengths to get here. We can't possibly give up now, can we? Shifeng also understood Unyielding Heart's worries. If they died now, it would indeed be a big loss. However, he had to obtain the God Slayer's treasure no matter what. In the worst-case scenario, he was even willing to use his final trump card. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. "EU okay, let's go in and take a look." Unyielding Heart nodded. He, too, thought that Shifeng's words were correct. They had already gotten this far. It would be a pity if they abandoned the expedition. Not to mention, they still had the Demon Prince to guard them. If further progress was truly impossible, they could still escape. Following which, Shifeng and the others made their way to the cave. However, when the team walked through the cave entrance, a startling scene suddenly occurred. The instant Froboro stepped into the cave, a red beam shot out from the cave's depths. Before Shifeng could even have Froboro execute evasive maneuvers, the red beam had already pierced through the Demon Prince's body. After getting struck, the Lord of the Dead, who had been invincible up to this point, burst into a bundle of flames and vanished without a trace. Chapter 2763, God. Chapter 2763, God. He died. Shifeng was dumbfounded at the sight of Froboro one-shotted. Not only was that red beam unbelievably fast, but it even packed enough power to kill a demon prince instantly. Although the Bible of Darkness summoned only a weak clone of Frobero's true body, this clone still possessed the physique of a bona fide half-step demon king. Even true Tier 5 demon kings couldn't slay a half-step demon king in one hit. As for the red beam originating from a barrier trap or magic circle, the likelihood of that was low. Any barrier trap or magic array would require its user to be present to display its greatest power. Without the user, barrier traps and magic arrays could, at most, trap someone. They definitely did not have the ability to kill the clone of a half-step demon king instantly. Not to mention, the beam just now didn't look like it originated from a magic array or barrier but more like an offensive spell. Everyone else present was also stunned by this situation, and chills spread all over their body instantly. What happened? That's a half-step demon king we are talking about. The demon prince that they believed was invincible had actually gotten killed instantly. If they took a similar attack on their Tier 3 bodies, they, too, wouldn't last a second. However, this still wasn't the crucial point. The fact that the other party could one-shot a half-step demon king meant that the other party was among the most horrifying existences they had come across. Meanwhile, none of these horrifying existences were things players dared to offend because the possible consequences in doing so included the annihilation of their souls. If that happened, they would really have to start all over again. However, before anyone could snap out of their daze, a terrifying mental pressure assaulted them. As if time had stopped, everyone froze in place. In fact, even their thoughts had fallen into a torpor. They simply stood still, not knowing what to do. While everyone stagnated, Shifeng clearly sensed something, and his heart immediately grew cold at this discovery. It's over. In his previous life, he had seen this time-stopping phenomenon only once in a video of a group of Tier 6 God-ranked experts clashing against an ancient evil god. The fight back then had been earth-shattering. However, aside from the Tier 6 God-ranked experts and a few Tier 5 experts, the other players present had no idea what exactly had happened. By the time everyone recovered, the battle was already over. For most of the players present, the battle had basically started and ended in an instant. To them, it felt as if nothing had happened whatsoever. However, that had been far from being the case. By the time everyone recovered from their stupor, 1/10 of a kingdom had disappeared from God's domain, leaving behind an endless wasteland littered with shattered space. Now that this scene was replaying before Shifeng's eyes, this meant that the other party was no weaker than that ancient evil god in the past. Just when the flow of time was slowing and Shifeng's thoughts were about to stagnate, a crimson glow suddenly bloomed from his spatial bag. The appearance of the crimson glow immediately dispelled the power enveloping him. Afterward, a shabby yet dazzling broken blade flew out of the spatial bag and hovered quietly in front of him. This is the Ash Blade. Shifeng was shocked when he saw this broken blade. Various legends were circulating in God's domain regarding the Ash Blade, which was rumored to be the God-Slayer's weapon. A weapon named the Ash Blade had also appeared in Shifeng's previous life. Back then, the owner of this weapon had been a mysterious expert nobody knew. However, what everyone did know was this mysterious person's heaven-defying feat with the Ash Blade in hand. This mysterious expert had single-handedly annihilated a superguild's main city. Moreover, the Ash Blade this person wielded was incredibly powerful. Even epic weapons would break after suffering 3 or 4 hits from the Ash Blade. Only fragmented legendary weapons could barely withstand its power. For this reason, everyone had suspected that the Ash Blade was a legendary weapon. Hence, Shifeng had kept the Ash Blade all this time instead of discarding it. After all, there might be a day when he could recast it. Of course, there was another legend regarding the Ash Blade, which stated that the Ash Blade was a clue to the God-Slayer's legacy. However, according to historical materials in the libraries of the various kingdoms and empires, nobody had ever found the Ash Blade. Only after that mysterious expert had appeared and thoroughly shattered the status quo of God's domain did everyone start paying attention to the Ash Blade. How interesting. Out of the people that arrived this time, someone actually brought that item. It seems you are quite lucky. While Shifeng was surprised by the Ash Blade, a deep and indifferent voice came from the depths of the cave. It used not the human language but divine language instead. Similar to the demonic language, despite Shifeng having no knowledge of the divine language, his brain still understood the meaning conveyed by the words. Before Shifeng could react to the divine words, an elderly man clad in a grey robe appeared before him. This elderly man's body was in a translucent soul state. Moreover, it was incredibly unstable, as if it would disappear at any moment. However, Shifeng could still feel great power coming from the old man, which awoke in Shifeng the urge to submit. The old man's information was thoroughly hidden. It was impossible to glean any information about him at all. Esteemed elder, we came here purely by mistake. We did not come here with any purpose. I hope you can forgive us, Shifeng said apologetically to the old man. He dared not display any disrespect to the elder before him. Although Shifeng wasn't aware of the old man's true identity, the fact that the old man could stop time meant that he was undoubtedly at the Tier 6 standard. Even if the old man was only a remnant soul now, he still wasn't an existence Shifeng could afford to offend. You don't have to lie. I know why you came here, the old man said as he looked at Shifeng quietly, his deep gaze seemingly seeing through Shifeng's soul. Not only did you acquire that map, but you even hold the ash blade. In that case, you qualify to enter this place and know its secret. How much you can gain from this secret will depend entirely on yourself. I am only an observer and the protector of this place. I won't do anything to interfere with your progress. Shifeng felt deeply relieved when he heard the old man's words. As for whether the old man was lying to him or not, Shifeng didn't care. After all, even if the old man was lying to him, Shifeng couldn't do anything about it. Esteemed elder, may I know what will happen to my friends? Shifeng asked worriedly. Although he himself was no longer in any immediate danger, he couldn't say the same for his teammates. It was entirely possible for the old man to erase their existences permanently to keep this place a secret. Don't worry. I won't kill them, the old man said, chuckling as he glanced at Shifeng's teammates. After all, they are individuals blessed by heaven. They won't die even if they are killed, right? Shifeng couldn't help growing slightly nervous at the old man's question. For some reason, he had a feeling that this old man knew a lot of things. In fact, he might even understand the true existence of players. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked such a question. This was the first time Shifeng had met such an NPC. Alright, I'll stop messing with you. Since Shifeng didn't dare respond to his question, the old man dropped the topic. He then said, You hold the ash blade, which means you are the chosen one. Hence, you may enter the cave. As for the others, they will be teleported out of this place. Of course, as you have been lucky enough to get selected, you can also bring 9 people with you. However, you'd best think about who to bring with you. The secret of this place isn't something heaven-blessed individuals like yourselves can imagine. A single mistake might even result in a true death for you. When the old man said the words true death, he even placed emphasis on them. It sounded as if he was warning Shifeng, yet it also sounded as if he was teasing him. His behavior made it impossible for Shifeng to guess his thoughts. Nonetheless, Shifeng did not pay too much heed to the old man's warning. His goal in visiting the ruined mountain range was the Earthfall secret land. Although he did not know what kind of secret the secret land contained, from what he heard, the 3 super guilds that monopolized the secret land had acquired a lot of benefits. This meant that the secret land shouldn't be a very dangerous place. I've decided to bring the 4 of them. May I know if that is okay? Shifeng asked as he pointed at Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yang Ya, and Cleansing Whistle. Only 4. After taking a glance at Lifeless Thorn and the others, the old man looked at Shifeng in surprise and asked, Are you sure you don't want to bring more? You should know that the cost of entering that place is extraordinary. The amount of time you can stay there is also very limited. I'm sure. Shifeng nodded. Initially, he had considered bringing more people with him. However, with the possibility of this secret being much greater than he imagined, every additional person he brought along would be an additional risk. Hence, he decided to bring only Lifeless Thorn's group of 4. After all, the 4 of them had long since known many of his secrets. They could truly be considered his people already. However, the Azura Adventurer team's other members were not as reliable. Alright, this is your decision. The old man no longer pursued the matter and waved his hand at the 4 selected people. Apart from Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yang Ya, and Cleansing Whistle, all the others immediately transformed into streaks of light and flew out of the cave. The streaks of light then left the ruined mountain range, dodging the purple lightning decorating the neutral map's sky. Meanwhile, Lifeless Thorn and the others suddenly jumped up in surprise. What's going on? When Lifeless Thorn and the others saw their current situation, they fell into a daze. Just a moment ago, there had been nobody standing before them. In fact, even Shifeng had been behind them. However, in the blink of an eye, not only did Shifeng appear in front of them, but the rest of their team also disappeared without a trace. It was obvious that there was a blank in their memories. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EUE was now, a scary old man stood before them. And they couldn't read any information about this old man. Alright, stop looking around randomly. Your gazes are very annoying. Do you really think I can't sense them? The old man suddenly shouted at Lifeless Thorn and the others, the brief pressure he exuded nearly making their knees buckle. I'll let you off this time, but if you behave like this to anyone else, they won't be as easy on you as I am. Upon hearing the old man's words, Lifeless Thorn and the others hurriedly nodded and promptly stopped using their identification skills on the old man and their surroundings. That's more like it. Now, follow me. The old man nodded when he saw Lifeless Thorn and the others turn obedient. He then began walking into the depths of the cave. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.